Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So for this video I will be discussing a character design that's pretty close to my heart. So as you know, I'm playing a DND campaign, and I do like to design the characters that I come across, and this character in particular was one me and the rest of my party were actually very fond of. So this is Karl. Karl is just a foot soldier, so with the designing process I actually really tried to focus on making him maybe not stand out quite as much as people would expect. And that's kind of tricky because obviously you want to design something that's both iconic but at the same time doesn't feel like they would be a main character. So I really try to lean into the more mundane outfit and maybe more lanky, unconfident facial features that would help him get a little bit of personality without having him stand out too much, taking center stage. So he's just a foot soldier, which means not really capable of much, so he didn't need to feel very strong or very capable even. He just needed to be equipped with the tools that a foot soldier would have. So a version of armor that actually makes sense. In this case, by the way, this character, or our D&D campaign rather, is set in the world of Exandria, the Critical Role universe. And he is actually a soldier of the Dwendalian Empire. Now interesting is, a lot of these fictional empires are actually founded in, or at least they're very much inspired by a specific empire in reality. And I researched this and I figured out, okay, the Dwendalian Empire is specifically inspired by like 15th century Russian soldiers. So I did a little bit of research. Plate mail was the most common resource, but I didn't want to give him full plate mail. I actually wanted to feel, again, a little bit just haphazardly equipped. So just a couple of iron plates because they couldn't really, they didn't want to spend basically as much money on the soldiers. That's kind of the idea that I wanted to give. Like, he feels like he is at least armored a little bit, but not necessarily equipped for like a very strong and very, very difficult battle. So it's all about really trying to make him feel convincing in the role that he's supposed to fulfill. And I think the role of a character is immensely important when you're actually trying to design something. So in this case, again, the armor, the posture, the body type, the facial expression even, it's all conveying, I am just a normal guy. They forced me to wear this suit, and now I am here trying to fight you guys. Unfortunately, since he was just a normal guy, things didn't really end well for Karl. Karl ended up crushed underneath the rubble of a building after an explosion. We mourned him very much, so RIP Karl. But in his memory, I decided to make this little character design, and it does serve its purpose of conveying, I think, the hilarious story that we went through when we were trying to convince Karl to join our team. He didn't. Spoilers. So, back to the actual design explanation. Karl, again, foot soldier, not too capable. I got my foundation actually to a pretty decent point, and as you saw, I've had some markers explaining the different methods or the different steps I take when I'm actually trying to finish off a design like this. Now, there will be a longer video explaining this where I'm actually doing real-time demos on how I go through my character design process step by step, where I can show you the exact steps that I take to finish this character. Now, in this case, the steps are actually fairly clear. I get a sketch. My sketches tend to be rather clean already. I don't want to have too clean of a line drawing. I just kind of want to get the texture to feel believable enough so that it feels like the materials are different, the character actually already has 3D form before I've added in the colors or the values. And once I actually start getting in the colors, like, I really try to work non-destructively. But I don't know about you guys, working non-destructively is kind of difficult. Now, in case you don't know what I mean by working non-destructively, that just means having a good layer setup where you can easily change things if need be. Now, I usually just paint things from scratch, so for this character I really tried to focus on having separate layers for the different materials and slowly building things up. For example, the shadow path was a big part of that, so that I could specifically change the edges of the specific shadow to add more form to it, and then afterwards, you know, after a while the layers become too much for me and I'll just kind of put a new layer on top and start painting over the damn thing. So throughout the entire process, it is just building up layers, making sure that I have the proper materials separated before I actually move into the painting. The preparation there is quite important because it does help me keep a bit more of a structured flow so that I don't waste too much time on things that I could have already figured out earlier in the designing process. The thing about designing is we want to make things be efficient. We want to actually have a design workflow where we're either very capable of changing things or we're just prepared enough so that we don't need to change too many things. And in this case, since the drawing was already so elaborate, I didn't really have too much problem solving to do once I got into the painting. All I really needed to figure out was where is the light going to be coming from, how intense is the light going to be, and obviously a little bit of compositional elements, but the 3D form was already there, the texture was already there, the gesture was already there, and the expression was already there, so I just needed to fill in the colors and bring it to a nice end result. One of the things that I think you would enjoy doing most is something that actually has quite a large impact on a design like this. And you can see that in this design specifically, I don't really have that many different materials, but I basically have the cloth material, the skin, and metal. And limiting my materials to a few very contrasting materials makes the design feel very streamlined, very balance, because now I have these reflective materials that have these very bright shiny highlights that have a lot of color because they are reflecting the environment. And then you have the gambeson that's actually a little bit more matte and isn't reflecting the environment as much. It's retaining a lot of its own color, making it stand out even more. And because it isn't as shiny as the other materials, suddenly we would get a bit of a balance and it starts feeling much more believable and much more grounded. A very common mistake that I see people do when they are rendering their characters is they will basically paint everything as if it were the same material. They won't think enough about how light would actually interact with those materials. And the only way you can learn more about that is by just having painted a lot of different materials already. Like that's the visual library, just your inherent knowledge on how you can actually make these different materials feel believable. And that would make your character stand out, like avoid that your character would look too plastic. I think a lot of characters tend to have sort of the Ken doll effect where they are all very manufactured in the way that they just have the same level of gloss throughout every single material. So do keep that in mind. That is definitely one of the core things that can make or break a character design. And that's a little bit of a shame if you have a nice drawing underneath, that it just kind of tends to fall flat on its face when you start adding those colors, because again, we don't have that variation. As with anything in character design, the thing to keep in mind, and again with the material specifically, but also with anything else, is that we want to have our design be mostly something and a little bit of something else. So for example, mostly fabric, a little bit of metal, mostly lanky, a little bit capable, mostly armor, a little bit non-armored, whatever it is that you can come up with, mostly organic, a little bit rigid. Those ratios are very, very important, and a lot of people might refer to this in different ways. You might have heard of the 80-20 rule, you might have heard of the idea of big, medium, small, but when you boil all of those design principles down to just core, fundamental principles, we get everything back to just ratios and hierarchies. Having a clear hierarchy, making sure that it is nobody can mistake a design for being about one thing in particular, and having a bunch of set dressing basically that is less important than that original one thing. So a hierarchy, a primary focal point, a secondary focal point, a tertiary focal point, a primary color, a secondary color, a tertiary color, a primary material, a primary expression, a primary shape language. Hierarchy is the main thing that will make something believable, and that's, I think, the most important piece of information that you can get from any kind of concept artist. once you get this through your head, then you will start feeling much more comfortable with your designing, and you will feel like you would have unlocked an entire new way of creating, because then suddenly you have designs that have so much impact, that feel like they are so deliberate, and that's amazing to get to the point where you are able to make these personality-driven worlds and personality-driven characters. It's really fun once you unlock those skills, and that takes a while to get there. It takes a lot of visual library development, a lot of practice, because we want to practice these core fundamental skills to the point where they become intuition. It's kind of like, for example, after you've learned how to walk, then you don't think about walking, so now suddenly I can look around while I'm walking without having to look where I'm stepping. And maybe when I'm learning how to drive a car, at first I need to look where I'm actually shifting my gears, but after a while, you just do it blindly and you do it on autopilot. So with any skill, it takes practice to get to the point where you can comfortably do something, to make room in your brain to focus on new principles that you need to learn, new skills that you need to develop. So focusing on that, focusing on tackling the individual elements one by one to set you up for success, I think would really help you creating these designs a bit more clearly. So what I would suggest you do is, if you are having trouble with maybe getting a nice hierarchy in your shape language or in your colors or in your design, then tackle design specifically with one of these goals in mind. Say, I'm going to design a character and I really want to make sure that my color palette has those hierarchies. And you don't necessarily want to care about anything else. The color palette will take priority there. And you'll do that a couple of times. Maybe the shapes aren't perfect, maybe the personality isn't quite there, but the color palette is there. And there's multiple types of exercises that you can do to tackle these individual subjects as well, but breaking it up into these separate steps, and then maybe the next design can be, I really want to get a nice hierarchy in the shape language. Maybe the next one, I really want to have a nice hierarchy in the function or in the storytelling. Breaking it up into steps will eventually help you to combine all of these steps together. The quickest way to fail a design is by trying to do too much too quickly. And that doesn't mean that you're not allowed to be ambitious. Like, on the contrary, I encourage people to be ambitious all the time. But there's a time and place. When you want to practice something, it is limitation and forcing yourself to slow down and be very specific about what you want to practice. And when you want to just have fun, by all means go for ambition. Ambition is great to have. Because ambition is what will eventually teach you how to experiment, and experimentation is also what will eventually help you improve your skills more and more, because through experimentation we will learn so many new things that other people might not dare to. Experimentation is what helps us avoid sort of the same face syndrome, or having designs that all seem very similar. So that's something to keep in mind, where we want to focus on specific times and places to experiment and to go wild with what we want to create, and specific times and places where we are going to limit ourselves into focusing on a very specific skill that we then would like to practice to the point where we are comfortable and confident, and we can take that information with us into the next design. Because every design you make, you take something else with you, and you start building up that confidence, building up that skill level, and after a while you won't know when it happens, but after a while suddenly you can do these things. And I can't tell when I made like a big leap in my art. Quite often people ask me like, oh, when did you know, or what was the main thing that made you feel comfortable? What made you grow as an artist? Well, I can't tell. It's a compilation of so many different things. I don't really know which specific parts of my journey would cause to create me such a leap, because it is everything. It's all of the steps combined. It might have been the sketches I make when I'm sitting on the train, and when I'm just kind of looking around at people, trying to make sure that I get their expressions well. It might be when I went to go sit in the park and when I was sketching that tree in front of me that had a nice and cool shape. Maybe when I want to do some watercolors and I wanted to really capture the right color temperature of the water and the lake and the sky and the trees around me. Maybe it was during that one job where I had to design something that I was wildly uncomfortable with. Really can't tell. It's all of these things combined that will help me get better and better till I actually get to the point where I can design anything I want. Now, Karl here is a good example of one design that I really was happy with, and I didn't necessarily know how I got there. So again, hope you guys enjoyed my little ramble on character design and design principles. A video specifically tackling the process will be coming soon, but in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.